'Cause by 1814, taking the US back would have meant years of fighting, enormous costs, and the near certainty of another prolonged insurgency across forests, rivers, and frontier settlements that Britain still couldn't fully control. And all of that would be required just as Britain was finally gaining the upper hand against Napoleon. So once again, Britain chose restraint. The War of 1812 ended with Britain walking away from its second chance to reclaim the United States. And when the guns finally fell silent in Europe in 1815, Britain had something it hadn't had in decades: peace. Napoleon was finally gone. For the first time in a generation, Britain could have looked west again and reconsidered the question it had postponed for so long. But the America it saw then was no longer the fragile former colony of 1776. In the years Britain had been fighting for survival, the United States had been growing rapidly, and in ways that fundamentally changed the calculation. Its population had surged. New states were forming. Settlers pushed beyond the Appalachians, carving towns and trade routes deeper into the continent. What had once been a narrow coastal strip was becoming a continental system. Geography, once Britain's obstacle, was now America's shield. The Mississippi River bound the interior together. The Great Lakes formed a natural northern barrier. Distance, forests, and scale combined to create something Britain recognized immediately: a landmass that could no longer be taken easily. And now, being adversaries was not an option. So Britain played it smart. It began to see it as something far more useful: a growing market. American farms fed British factories. American cotton powered British mills. British banks financed American railroads, ports, and industry. Trade flowed in both directions, faster and more profitably than it ever had under colonial rule. And crucially, none of it required occupation. Britain could profit from American growth without paying the cost of control. In fact, British investors made more money from the United States in the 19th century than the empire ever had from the colonies themselves. Geopolitically, interests began to align as well. Both countries benefited from stable Atlantic trade. Both opposed rival European powers, and both had more to gain from cooperation than conflict. By the mid-1800s, America was now a rising power whose success strengthened British interests rather than threatened them. The empire that once ruled America now made more sense as its partner. And once that shift happened, the question of reconquest disappeared for good. Because by then, the British Empire had reached the part of the story where power stops being emotional and starts being practical. The goal was no longer to rewind the clock and reclaim what was lost. The goal was to stay on top of a world that was changing fast, keep the trade moving, keep Europe balanced, keep the empire profitable, and keep the next crisis from becoming an existential one. The old empire didn't lose America the way people imagine. It released it into a different role: a former colony that grew into a customer, a rival that matured into a partner, and eventually a new power that could help Britain hold the very thing it cared about most: its position in the world.